Thank you. Honorable Ministers, Members of Parliament, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank the organizing committee for inviting me to say a few words. When I was asked to come this evening to speak about the elections and the president, I asked the organizing committee which areas I should touch on. The topics that were given to me were the experiences working with the president over the last 2 years, and the reforms and the work agenda that we have implemented. As you all know, 2 years ago, just a little over 2 years ago, when President Ranil Wickremesinghe became the Prime Minister, none of us, most of us in the cabinet, most of us in the parliamentary group, has never worked with him before. But we were in a situation where we had a government that had a majority of 2/3 in the parliament. We had a majority elected from the SLPP, and we've all worked with leaders from the SLPP for a very long time, and our opinions and our policies had been different for the longest time. 2.5 years ago, when we were going through the economic crisis, I was also asked to take over the role of Ministry of Power and Energy. And at that time, I remember the day that I took over office was the day that there was a 16-hour power cut. And also we were struggling to pay for the vessels that were outside the Colombo harbor to supply the adequate fuel to the country. 1 month after I took over office, there was another incident where the then Prime Minister, Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa, had to step down, and then we had the new Prime Minister coming in. We worked for a very short time, and I remember the first cabinet meeting working with Ranil Wickremesinghe as the Prime Minister was the experience that he brought into the cabinet. We had President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who did not have the adequate political experience, and we saw the immediate change in the cabinet meetings, the decision making, certain policies that we had to implement. There were certain requirements that we had, speaking with IMF, speaking with the international community, and also some of the requirements that were there from the central bank. We worked for 1 month, and after a month, he became the president, elected from a group of MPs who has never voted for him before. And we were able to implement certain reforms in this country that has been discussed for many decades. I had the pleasure of working with him for 2.5 years, and the way he led the group of people that were given to him was the biggest changing point in the last 2.5 years. A lot of candidates now talk about different teams, the teams that they have, the teams that they will have in the future. One aspect of being a leader is to work with the resources that you have, work with the team that you have. And if the president was able to work with a group of MPs, a group of cabinet that has not worked with him ever before, and to transform the country over the last 2 years, it speaks much about his abilities than anything else. 2.5 years ago, we had to make the difficult decisions. One of the key things that I saw in the president was that he was not afraid to take the correct decisions. Some of them were very unpopular decisions. I remember first we're going up to him when we had the discussion about the fuel price revision. There was a pricing formula that has been adopted, and the first instance was that we had to increase prices by about 120 rupees. So when I went up to him, I said, "Sir, this is going to be a very difficult job. The formula says that we need to increase the prices by about 120, and it's not going to be a popular decision. How do you want me to take this?" He said, "Take the decision now, don't delay it. Take the decision now so that we don't have to take a much difficult decision in the future. Those sort of unpopular but the correct decisions paved the way for us to have the supply chain back in order, but it took more than a year. I just went through the past records to see that we have completely forgotten that we had a period where we didn't have any fuel supply in the country, but also there was a period of about 8-month period where we had used different mechanisms. A QR code was introduced to give a quota system. And the quota system was in effect until the 1st of September 2023, just a year ago. Just a year ago, everyone was using the quota facilities to manage their day-to-day life, manage their businesses, manage other activities. But doing certain decisions meant that he was not going to be popular as well. As I said, the unpopular decisions were not just looking at just the specific sectors. When we took over the responsibility in this ministry, I remember the first meeting that we had with the IMF. One of the prior conditions to get the IMF agreement in place was that we have a cost-reflective electricity tariff and a cost-reflective fuel pricing mechanism. And it also meant that it's not just a cost-reflective one, but we need to recover the past losses as well. The CPC at that time was about 3 trillion in debt, in obligations to suppliers, to banks, to the treasury, to the financial lenders, and the difficult decisions that we took 2 years ago had paved the way now for CPC to stand on its own, clear the outstanding debt to the 2 state banks and also to the suppliers, and also to maintain the energy security in the country. All these decisions were taken, I would say, in the most difficult circumstances. But we also have to understand that it's important. The reforms that had taken place over the last 2 years are continued in the future. When most of us came into the government, when we took the responsibility, I know that Manu Shananakara here is in the audience. Some of them were not in the governing group at that time, but when the president extended the invitation to join, to build a national government and to implement these policies, there was only a few that took the risk, putting their political careers on the line to make the right decisions at that time. And there were many people who believed they could do certain things, but never took the chance, never took the risk at that moment to make the changes that are needed. Last year, when we started the process of rebuilding, after the reform process, one of the key things that I noticed about the president was that he was not looking at his personal goals, looking at the next election. When we had certain policy matters to be implemented, policy decisions that to be taken, some are very tough decisions to be made. There were at times during the cabinet meetings, certain members of our cabinet, certain members of our group voiced their concerns to the president and said, "Sir, please don't do this now. You're going into an election next year. You're going into a presidential election. If you do this, it might affect the chances of you being re-elected, and we might have to go home sooner than later." Then I remember the president, what he said was, "No, we have to take decisions irrespective of the elections." At one point, one of our cabinet colleagues said these exact words, "Sir, Mahinda Rajapaksa මහත්තයා නම් අපිට කියලා තියෙන්නේ හැම එකක්ම දේශපාලන වශයෙන් හිතලා ගන්න කියලා. 2005-10 මැතිවරණ දෙකේම එතුමා ජයග්‍රහණය කරන්න අගමැතිකම 6 දිනකට වික්කා. ඔයාට අගමැතිකම දෙනවා, ඔයාට අගමැතිකම දෙනවා කියලා. So this was communicated at the cabinet by one of the senior colleagues that the former President Mahinda Rajapaksa, when he was contesting elections, he would give a promise to someone for the elections, and there were about 6 individuals that were promised the premiership after the elections. But the story was that none of the 6 got the premiership, but he got elected in. And we remember when we went to the president for certain things, he always said, continue this program. The bills that are needed to be presented in Parliament, don't delay them. Even at the last moment, before the presidential election was announced, I remember the economic transition bill, the electricity reforms bill, the public finance management bill. These were certain bills that have been discussed for many years and by many governments and have been discussed in many IMF programs before, but could not be completed. But thanks to the President's strong leadership, thanks to his steady policy implementation, now we know that there is a path that has been built to us that any government that is in Sri Lanka has to follow that footprint, implementing those reforms. One of the other key things that I have experienced with the President is a wealth of his experience that he brings to the table. The IMF agreement, a lot of people say it was something of a easier negotiation process. But we saw how difficult it was to negotiate, not just with the IMF, but with the international community, the development agencies, the different lending agencies, and what sort of work it took to get the IMF agreement in place. A lot of people thought that the IMF program was just to open up and bring some financial assistance or loan facility that could help the country. But there was a bigger thing in that. It was not just the financial support that we got. The main thing that we got was the assurance from other financial institutes, international lending agencies, development agencies, that we have a program in place and that Sri Lanka could be looked at a country again so that we can deal with all these agencies and international financial institutes in the future. One thing I would, before I conclude my remarks, is a lot of questions that were asked when I walked in here and sitting here for the last 30 minutes. A lot of people came and asked me how things are looking and how do you plan to do the next 3 weeks. We have asked this question a lot with the President over the last 8 weeks leading up to the election on his campaign program, his policies and everything. His policy is laid out to the public. It's the same policies that have been laid out in the last 2 years. The policies that have been approved by the Parliament, the financial management policy, which was approved by the Cabinet and the Parliament, which has to be continued. And if you look at the different candidates that have put down their proposals now, we are happy to see that most of them who had opposed these bills, opposed these programs in the last 2 years in Parliament, have also now taken a step and said, we will also implement certain similar programs with negotiations. But you know that it's not an easy task to negotiate or adopt new reforms or change the path that we have agreed with different agencies and other financial institutes. So it's the same policy that we do need to follow, and the most important thing is that when you have a leader that is elected in, that can work with the resources that you have, work with the team that is being given to him, that is what we require in the presidential race as well. The public will get the opportunity. I believe when the presidential election is over, first pick the leader of the country and then select the team that can support the leader in the future. So if he had worked with not a selected group of individuals, but the individuals that were given to him, he had shown immense qualities in driving with this team and showing that it can be achieved and it can be done as well. A few months ago, there was an interesting question that was asked again on the election, just like the questions that I received here today. A few months ago, when we were sitting down on the reform path of CEB and CPC, we were making plans to see that the next 12 months that we had the power generation in order and that the fuel supplies were adequate for the country. One of the key things that were brought up in the stakeholder meeting by the Met Department and by other various stakeholders was that the whole of last 2 years that they were predicting a drought for Sri Lanka and they were going to have less rain and then we'll have to go into alternative methods of power generation because our hydropower generations accounts to about 50% the last 2 years. But most of them said we are going into a drought year. They said that last year as well. They said that beginning of this year. But what I've understood is that over the last 2 years, all those predictions have also been inaccurate. And the 2 years, we've had more rain than any other years in the last 5 years. So going by opinion polls, going by different things, I would say the same thing. There can be predictions, but the reality is that it's far from the opinions that are being delivered. Your Excellency Anil Wickremesinghe, Mrs. Wickremesinghe, let me wind up quickly. As I said before, what we're looking at in this election is to elect a leader that can work with any situation in the country. There have been very few resources. There has been a team that has been not selected by him, but given to him, and he had worked with the international community. And when everyone in this country had no hope, I remember a time that there were individuals that were part of our government. We had a 149-member parliament group. There's about 20 members at the beginning of the financial crisis said that the then government cannot implement any reforms and cannot get us out of the economic crisis. Most of them went and sat on the opposition. Some of our own ministers resigned. Some of the members from parliament resigned from their memberships. Prime ministers resigned. A lot of individuals, political leaders, said that this country cannot be reformed. We cannot come out of the crisis. And I remember a lot of individuals left the country saying that they had no hope in this country. A lot of people who came to us during the crisis for fuel, for power generation. I remember most of the companies representing the BUI, most of the apparel companies, other businesses, they said their businesses are shutting down and they're moving elsewhere. And they had no hope in this country. Financial institutes, when we met them, the 2 state banks, they had no hope. No one had hope in this country. When everyone rejected to take the responsibility, when certain individuals put conditions to accept some part of responsibility, President Ranil Wickremesinghe put his hand up and accepted the responsibility as it is and have taken us over the last 2.5 years which no other government, no other leader has been able to do. We have done reforms in most sectors that we have dreamt of, that we have discussed. Over the last 2.5 years, we have passed more laws, brought in legislation to the parliament. I don't think any other government has done that before. There have been many structures that have been put in place. One advice that the President gave us as the Minister of Power and Energy, what he told me was 2 years ago, that investors might not come in the first 2 years, but you make sure that you put a foundation in, you put the framework in, you make sure that the CEB has the ability to pay back the investor, make sure that the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation has the ability to pay back its suppliers. Put that foundation in, and once the agreements are in place, once a legal framework is in place, the investors will follow. So that is what we are seeing now in the country. That's why we need to continue that pathway. That's why a group of people who has never supported him before, a group of people who had never worked with him before, a group of people who had worked to defeat him before, have, without any conditions, we have joined together to see that he continues this work for our country, so that the foundation that we have put in now is better used in the future. So that's why I believe President Ranil Wickremesinghe is the best candidate that we have in this race. I wouldn't say it's a race. The best candidate that we have for the country. A lot of people say that they will deliver certain things as promises in their policies, but we have a leader now who has delivered on his promises, and we know that can deliver for us in the future as well. So with that, I conclude my remarks. It has been an honor for the last 2.5 years, and been a very much of a learning experience for young politicians as myself as well. We have learned a lot. He has groomed us. He has given that insights. He has guided us. And someone asked me whether he has shouted at us. That's something that he hasn't done. But he has given us the advice. When we were looking at different directions, he has always given us the right advice with the wealth of experience that he has, dealing with the international community, other agencies, and he inherited a team, and he delivered with the team that he had, not just a political team that he had. He was given a central bank governor, he was given a finance secretary, he was given a set of officials. None of them were appointed by him, but he made sure that he used all the resources that he had, all the officials, all the politicians, and we have, I would say, done most of the reform work that we haven't been able to do over the last 5-6 decades in this country. So with that, I believe there's a lot more to do in this country, and with the foundation that we have set in, it's only going to get better with the right leadership, with the leadership of President Ranil Wickremesinghe. Thank you.
இது போன்று பல செய்திகளை தெரிந்து கொள்ள நமது வைப்ஸ் டிவி யூடியூப் தளத்தை சப்ஸ்கிரைப் செய்து அருகிலுள்ள பெல் பட்டனை கிளிக் செய்யுங்கள். மேலும் பல செய்திகளை அறிந்து கொள்ள www.vaibznews.com, vibesnews.com என்ற இணையதளத்தை பார்வையிடுங்கள்.